They laughed at him, whispered behind his back, and smirked into the cameras, thinking they'd outmaneuvered the quiet black man in the designer suit. But when the CEO calmly reached across the boardroom table, looked into the live feed, and said, "Gentlemen, I think we're done here," they didn't realize he had just erased a $900 million deal with a flick of his wrist and rewritten his legacy in history. Subscribe now for jaw-dropping true stories of power, betrayal, and the bold moves that changed. They thought he was just the token executive, the diversity face on a brochure, a quiet, composed black man in a world where old money shook hands behind closed doors and smiled for the press only after the contracts were signed. But Dorian Fields had built his company, Novacor, from the ground up. Slept on floors of server rooms he couldn't afford, coded in cafes until his laptop died, and turned every rejection into drive, every condescending glance into ambition, and every barrier into a blueprint. Now, sitting at a sleek obsidian conference table inside the 27th floor of Echelon Tower, surrounded by the billion-dollar legacy men of the Trentworth Consortium, a family-owned, industrial giant known for absorbing minority-led companies, diluting them until unrecognizable, and calling it merger success, Dorian knew the air was laced with judgment, not respect. And though he had brought Novacor's value to the edge of $1 billion with clean energy tech, no one else had mastered. These men still treated him like a novelty act. They were too polite to interrupt, till one of them, a silver-haired executive named Landon Trask, muttered beneath his breath, not realizing the microphones were live and the cameras were streaming. Internally, to over 200 Novacor shareholders and partners, look at him, trying to play CEO. This is what happens when optics take priority over experience, and his colleague, snickering, replied, "We'll own his tech," and send him home with a participation trophy, which drew stifled chuckles from the rest, their smugness sharp as cut glass. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Dorian had baited this exact response by leaking that he was desperate for capital, by allowing whispers that Novacor was struggling, and by putting just enough temptation on the table to draw out the arrogance that hid beneath their tailored suits and curated smiles. And when the laughter died and silence returned, Dorian calmly leaned forward, adjusted his cufflinks, and said with perfect clarity, "Gentlemen, thank you for showing me exactly who you are," before turning to the camera, now projected across the Novacor global feed and social platforms, where tens of thousands of employees, clients, and investors were watching, and continued. Effective immediately, all negotiations with the Trentworth Consortium are terminated. Will not be bought, diluted, or demeaned. We are not for sale, and certainly not to men who believe leadership is a color-coded privilege. And while the Trentworth board sputtered and fumed, scrambling to control the damage, the feed cut to a pre-recorded announcement, a partnership with Arcadia International, a progressive European firm offering $1.2 billion for joint IP rights, a $300 million investment into Novacor's underserved community STEM initiatives, which Dorian had secured weeks prior but kept secret. Knowing the public cancellation would hit harder, echo louder, and empower deeper, and the fallout was instant. Headlines erupting across business media, social networks buzzing with praise, the hashtag #NovaPride trending globally, and Novacor's valuation surging as investors clamored to support a company with integrity. But the story didn't end there. A week later, Dorian received a quiet invitation to a closed-door summit in Geneva, attended by world leaders, climate strategists, and high-impact entrepreneurs, where he was offered a seat on the Global Energy Futures Council, becoming the youngest and only black member to sit at the table. And while Landon Trask's career unraveled under pressure, with leaks of past discriminatory deals surfacing like oil spills, Dorian launched the No Voice to Nova Voice initiative, a grant program for young minority founders in tech, naming each grant after a past investor who rejected him for being too green, too urban, or too ambitious. And in interviews, he never gloated, never cursed the men who mocked him, only said with quiet strength, "Success isn't revenge, it's a redirection of history." But behind the scenes, he doubled Novacor's valuation again by year's end, won the Humanitarian Tech Award, and hosted a live fireside chat with youth leaders in the same Echelon Tower conference room, now renamed the Legacy Room, while a discreet plaque on the wall read, "Here stood those who underestimated. Here rose the man they couldn't contain." And still, Dorian walked the halls not as a titan, but as a mentor, greeting interns by name, sitting in coding sessions to offer advice, and reminding everyone that power wielded with grace echoes louder than power thrown in anger, though many would argue, watching that moment replay over and over, that when he calmly ended a $900 million deal live on camera, it was the most powerful silence the boardroom had ever heard. Asterisk.